Hello and welcome. Today, we are cracking open a fascinating legal story that feels like it's straight out of a detective novel. We're calling it The Case of the Mistaken Signature. So let me just start by asking you this. Is your signature always binding? I mean, think about it. We sign for packages, we tap agree on screens, we put our name on the dotted line without a second thought. But what does that scribble actually lock you into? And that question, well, it leads us right into our first part here, the signature trap. Look, every time you sign something, whether it's with a pen or a click, you're making a promise, right? You're entering a contract. But what if the thing you're signing isn't what you think it is at all? What if you've been totally misled about what you're actually agreeing to? Well, believe it or not, the answer comes from a really dramatic court case way back in 1869. And the precedent it set is, I'd argue, more important today than ever before. It all kicks off with an old man and a very, very deceptive piece of paper. So let's set the scene with our story, which we're calling An Old Man's Deed. All right, let's meet our cast of characters. First up, you've got Mackinnon, an elderly gentleman, and it's important to know his eyesight isn't so good. Then we have Callow, a business associate who's got a sneaky plan up his sleeve. And finally, there's a guy named Foster, a totally innocent third party who just gets tangled up in this whole mess. So the action starts when Callow goes to see Mackinnon. He pulls out a document and says, "Hey, can you just sign this? It's just a simple guarantee for an insurance thing." Makes it sound like totally routine paperwork. And Mackinnon, well, he trusts the guy. And this slide right here shows you just how deep the deception went. On the left is what Mackinnon thought he was signing, a pretty minor guarantee. But on the right, that's the reality. He'd actually put his name on a personal bill of exchange, making him personally on the hook for a massive amount of debt. We're not just talking about a different document. This is a whole different category of financial risk. And what was that sum? £3,000. Now, that might not sound like a world-ending amount today, but in 1869, that was an absolute fortune. We're talking enough money to buy multiple houses. It was a life-changing amount of cash. So with Mackinnon's signature secured, Callow doesn't waste any time. He takes the bill to our third character, Foster, who, thinking it's all legit, gives him the money. And then, surprise, surprise, Callow disappears and defaults on the payment. So Foster, who's now out a ton of money, looks at the bill and sees only one other name to go after, Mackinnon. And this is the core of the whole problem. Mackinnon's signature is right there in black and white. On paper, it looks like a done deal. So does he have to pay up for a promise he literally never knew he was making? That exact question is what brings us to the climax of this whole story, the court's verdict. The court was in a really tough spot here. I mean, on one side, you've got this bedrock principle that your signature is your bond. If people could just walk away from things they've signed, business as we know it would just stop. But on the other hand, you have a pretty clear-cut case of someone being taken advantage of through fraud. And the court came up with a really profound answer. This quote from the judgment says it all. He never intended to sign, and therefore, in contemplation of law, never did sign. What they're saying is that the court looked past the physical ink on the paper and tried to find the true intention, the mind of the person signing. So the verdict came down. Mackinnon was off the hook. He was not liable for the money. The court decided that because his signature was gotten through such a fundamental trick, it was completely void. It was as if it never happened. And this huge decision created a brand new, powerful legal defense, one that you could basically translate to, not my signature. The official name for this is non est factum. It's Latin, and it literally means it is not my deed. It's a defense where you're essentially telling the court, yeah, that's my handwriting, but the piece of paper it's attached to is so fundamentally different from what I was told it was that my signature is meaningless. But, and this is a really big but, this is not some magic get-out-of-jail-free card for any contract you regret signing. The courts knew this could be easily abused, so they created a very, very high bar to clear, a super strict test. Okay, so here's the three-part test. First, your mistake had to be about the basic character of the document, not just some of the details. Second, what you actually signed had to be radically different from what you thought you were signing. And third, and this is the kicker, you can't have been careless or negligent. For Mackinnon, his poor eyesight was key. It meant he wasn't being careless, he was simply vulnerable. So I know what you might be thinking. A case from over 150 years ago about some old guy with bad vision? Why does this matter to any of us today? Well, it matters because this core idea of looking past just the signature to find real consent and of protecting vulnerable people, it is so much more critical in our crazy complex world today than it ever was back then. I mean, think about the applications right now. This is the same principle that helps protect seniors from those awful financial scams you hear about. It helps people with disabilities or someone who doesn't speak the language well. It even makes us question those ridiculously long terms and conditions that we all scroll through and click agree on without ever reading a word. So here's the big takeaway from all of this. A signature is supposed to be a symbol of consent. It's an outward sign of an inward agreement, a true meeting of the minds. And if that real consent isn't there because of a serious deception, then the signature itself can be worth nothing more than the ink it's written in. And that really leaves us with one final big question to chew on. In our modern age of one-click agreements and digital contracts that are a mile long, what does a signature, what does your signature truly even mean anymore?